Hi, my name is Lisa Pilgren and I'm a vintage lady.
This is Lisa. She's 22 years old and she has a very special clothing style.
So my style is all about vintage, from like the 1900s to the 1950s, sometimes even 60s, but mostly in the 30s. I think I like the elegance and the way the clothes are made, like very detailed and focus on the craftsmanship of the garments, which is not seen today in today's clothing, unfortunately.
Historical fashion is something that interested her from a young age, but it took some time for her to really start expressing herself in this way.
When you are in school, you don't feel you have the courage to stand out as much as you want to. So after I graduated, I went full on vintage. And before that, I kind of experimented on the weekends. Like, when you weren't in school, I would dress up and set my hair and like experiment with those kind of things. So when I graduated, I was kind of ready.
Her wardrobe is full of old pieces of clothing, and I can't help but wonder where she manages to find all of these skirts and dresses and socks and hats.
Being a vintage lover, you have to really search. You can't expect to find real good vintage in a normal thrift shop. You often have to go to specialized vintage shops that sell clothing from the 1950s and beyond. And then Instagram is also helpful, and Etsy and all those kind of websites. And also, a lot of my clothing come from my mom, and also, inheritance of different kinds. People wanting to get rid of their mother's clothes or their grandmother's clothes, so I take everything. And this is my great grandmother's engagement dress from 1901, and I got this last year, Christmas present from my grandma, and with a little letter that describes her memories of Ellen, who wore this dress, her grandmother, that is. And so here's the dress. So this is from 1901. This is the bodice, and this is the skirt. So you would wear these two together and it would make a dress.
An interest that really serves you well if you're a vintage lover is sewing, and that happens to be one of Lisa's biggest interests.
I started sewing only 2 years ago, actually. I don't know what happened. I just had this idea that I wanted to sew my own clothes. It's probably because I was more interested in vintage, and you can't find vintage clothing that fits you always, and so you need to make your own clothes. And so anyway, I decided very strong from the beginning that I wanted to be able to sew my own clothing. And so I started taking classes, like really beginners class, and from then I have worked really hard for the past 2 years. And now yesterday I found out that I was accepted to this school, which has a costuming program, and I got in. So that makes me very happy.
As you can see and hear, she's very passionate about the vintage lifestyle. So I asked her if she wishes that she was born in a different era.
In many ways, I wish I was born in another era, but at the same time it's very nice to be able to live in this time and choose what you want to pick from the different kinds, because I wouldn't want to live in a society where women weren't allowed to vote, or those kind of things. So I'm very happy to be living in this decade so I can choose the best parts.
She can hardly leave her apartment without getting comments from people about her looks. Most of them are positive, but some are really rude.
I've had people walk up to me and say things like, oh, you like the 1930s, do you also like fascism? And I'm like, what? And so I answered back to him, because it was a man, and I said like, oh, you look like you like the modern clothing. Do you also like the ISIS? Or like, you know, it's such a bizarre question, because of course I don't like fascism. So in the vintage community there is a slogan that goes vintage clothing, not vintage values. And so that I think that fits.
To wrap this video up, what can we learn from the vintage lifestyle?
I wish that people could be a little bit more careful about their clothes, like mending, and not just buy new clothes whenever there's a tiny little hole or something like that.
This is a great call. If we want to live a more responsible life, and why wouldn't we should be more careful with the stuff we own.